It's been a couple of months since the last Quickies episode, and I played a few shorter games in the meantime that I don't have that much to say about, so let's do another episode. The Almost Gone feels like a game that ran out of something. Maybe it was time, money, or just the will to continue. But let's back up a bit. Gameplay-wise, The Almost Gone is a classic point-and-click adventure game. That means that you're scouring the levels for items to solve a variety of puzzles, while a lot of the story is told through monologues by the main character. Crucially though, for a point-and-click adventure, she's never actually on screen. This is where the main visual draw of the game comes into play. The levels are all rendered in this cute isometric diorama aesthetic. All of the rooms are broken down into little cube sections that you can freely rotate and explore. This obviously implies that perspective plays a crucial part in the game, which is certainly the case. A few of the puzzles require you to use multiple chunks of the levels to solve, which sometimes require spatial awareness. However, these puzzles are in a clear minority over those that can be solved with traditional inventory items. And I have to say that while I like the puzzles that require you to rotate the dioramas to figure out solutions to the puzzles, it carries with it the downside that you have to rotate each room repeatedly to make sure you've found everything. And since a majority of the segments don't benefit at all from this rotation, I can at best attest mild praise for the mechanic. And given that the levels are divided into these cubic chunks, you'll end up traversing all these segments multiple times, especially whenever you've missed a detail and are stuck with a puzzle. But adventure games are always part puzzle and part story. And I have to say that the story of The Almost Gone is what absolutely drew me in and also ultimately made me question whether I should recommend it at all. The story is told in 5 chapters in non-chronological order. The implication, I think, is that our protagonist Emily isn't really exploring these spaces. It's heavily implied that something bad has happened to her and that what we're seeing is some kind of glimpse into the afterlife, given that one of the chapters takes place in the future while other chapters happen decades earlier. The narrative touches upon a lot of themes surrounding familial troubles and in general revolves around Emily trying to make sense of these troubles to overcome some kind of trauma. Emily tells of frequent fights, of being reprimanded by her parents, and of substance abuse. Her mother suffered from depression and is later revealed to have been institutionalized while eventually dying in said mental asylum under quite grim circumstances. Meanwhile, her father seems to be a victim of his own parents' shortcomings when raising him, while said grandparents had to fight with their own demons and failures in life. It's all fairly heavy stuff, and I generally like the juxtaposition of the early pastel-colored levels that sink into ever-increasing darkness as the backstory unfolds. There's some pretty fascinating and effective character building going on, even though Emily's monologue is supremely cynical, which can be a tough pill to swallow for some people. But then the game just kinda stops. It's not even that the game has a downer ending or anything, it just seems that, as I mentioned at the start, the game reaches the final rooms you get to explore and then the designers stop making the game. There doesn't seem to be a thesis statement that would attempt to try and tie the narrative together to put all these topics I've mentioned into proper context. There are plenty of hints that point towards a bigger picture, but overall it's a bit insubstantial. It's basically Gone Home meets The Shining. Okay, let me be a bit more verbose. Still, that single sentence pretty much sums up the entire game in terms of what you experience. For the uninitiated, Gone Home is what's commonly referred to as a walking simulator from 2013. It was centered around a young girl returning to her home and exploring it after an extended absence, while the rest of the family is somewhere else. It was characterized by having a fairly creepy atmosphere, right up until the moment you realized nothing scary was actually going on and there was never any danger. And while interactivity was very minimal, I felt that at least in terms of the little narratives you could find by thoroughly exploring the house, it was a worthwhile experience to have. In a similar vein, The Suicide of Rachel Foster is about a young woman, Nicole, returning to her abandoned home and exploring it. Only this time, it's a hotel way up in the mountains that gets cut off from the rest of the world by a snowstorm. That, as well as the hotel's possibly haunted nature, give rise to my comparison to The Shining. Mechanically, it too is a walking simulator. There are certain objects you can pick up that you can use elsewhere, but I'd hardly call any of these instances puzzles. It's a fairly rigidly directed experience, given that in this game you have another character called Irving to talk to who gives you clues as well as telling you how to solve some of the problems that crop up around the hotel. And similar to Gone Home, The Suicide of Rachel Foster features a bewildering number of objects you can pick up and inspect effect that serve no purpose whatsoever. Is this a stipulation in your 3D and texture artist contracts that they get to design a guaranteed number of objects that the players get to inspect in great detail? Anyway, if the game really just were Gone Home 2 Electric Boogaloo, I wouldn't have felt inclined to review it. There is something worth mentioning at this point, and I guess this should come with a content warning. If you're not comfortable with stories that feature suicide or sexual relationships between adults and minors, you'll probably want to skip ahead to this time code. As you might have guessed from the title of the game, the story centers around the death of a girl called Rachel Foster. The reason Nicole returns to the hotel is because both her parents have passed away and she has inherited it. She used to live there when she was younger, but her father's romantic engagement to a then 16-year-old Rachel, whom he also tutored, caused her mother to file for divorce, and she and Nicole ended up moving away. The aim of the story is to uncover the events that eventually led to Rachel's demise. Now, I've heard some criticism that the game portrays the relationship between Nicole's father and Rachel in a way that seems to condone ephebophilia. I personally can't really come to the same conclusion though. Sure, the game doesn't seem to dwell on it, and whenever Nicole discusses her father with Irving, the fact that this was a relationship between an adult and a minor is not often brought up. But honestly, that's how you talk about family. I doubt every family member of a murderer constantly discusses their crimes whenever the topic of the conflict is brought up. So no, I don't believe that just because the characters don't end every interaction with "furthermore, I consider that Carthage must be destroyed," does it logically follow that either the game or its creators condone grooming of minors. I think that mature media deserves the benefit of the doubt, that it can present you with challenging subject matter without spelling out what you're supposed to feel at every step. That's not to say that the game does this subject or even the secondary theme of suicide any justices, because once the twists of the game are revealed, the presence of Irving and his actions become less believable by the minute. Given that the game deals with these fairly heavy topics, I feel that the indications that the hotel might be haunted are a bit off message. In The Shining, it's never made clear what actually happens there, and if all you get to see is real, the lines are purposely blurry. But the narrative of this game isn't enhanced by this, and it actively detracts from the real human drama. Ultimately, I found the experience average at best. It suffers from the typical problems of walking simulators in that there's no gameplay there to enhance the story. And the story, while intriguing at first, is also completely unfocused and seems to be more interested in setting up a mystery and its subsequent plot twist at the end rather than exploring the heavy topics it decided to tackle with any grace or intelligence. They seem included more for the shock value than anything else. It pains me to compare two games to Gone Home in a row, but look at what I'm dealing with here. What Remains of Edith Finch is another game where a young woman returns to her abandoned home to explore it. Now, I'm aware that you might conclude from these opening statements that I think this game wouldn't be worth playing, but nothing could be further from the truth. This is a game that elevates the typical formula of the walking simulator and really manages to tell an engaging story. I'd be inclined to end the video right here, because I think the less you know about the game going into it, the better. So if you decide to heed my advice and check this game out for yourselves, stop the video now and go do so. For everybody else, here's the rest of my review. I'll still try to be as light on spoilers as I can be regardless. As stated, the game centers around the eponymous Edith Finch returning to where she grew up. Well, sort of. Once you finish the game, you'll notice that this isn't quite the entire story, but again, since I think you should totally play this game, I won't spoil it. Anyway, said home is located on Orcas Island, and right off the bat when you approach the house you'll notice that something's off. While the bottom two stories look like any regular home, the house seems to have these peculiar additions everywhere. Once you get there, you'll explore the house in a rather linear fashion, not unlike the previously discussed game. However, most of the rooms you encounter are completely sealed off. You only have little peepholes in the doors through which you can look inside. In order to get around the house, you'll need to find a variety of hidden passages between the rooms. While you're exploring, you'll hear Edith's commentary on what you're seeing, both as a narration as well as a text floating within the scene. I like how the text draws attention to the things Edith is talking about. It ensures that players won't miss these details. Now, the reason each room is locked off from the outside is because every family member who has passed away gets their own room sealed off as a sort of time capsule. It's amazing how much environmental storytelling the developers managed to cram into these rooms to give the characters inhabiting them a unique personality expressed through their possessions settings and decorations. Each room also contains a piece of writing you can read which transports you to a little magical realist vignette from the life of each person in the house. And this is where the game really shines. Seeing these glimpses into the lives of these characters was enthralling, especially against the background that each segment chronicles each character's final moments, each with their own ironic twist at the end. That's not to say that it treats its characters' deaths frivolously. The tragedy of their loss is not glossed over. What clearly shines through here is that these characters exude humanity in all their facets, and that even though individually they're all extremely different characters, it's clear that they were all part of the same kinda quirky family. Now, as said above, it's still a walking simulator. Sure, the vignettes do offer some more quote-unquote gameplay in the sense that you get to do more than just walk around, but there aren't any specific mechanics, puzzles, or challenges other than following the way ahead. If you're cool with that and want to see the best thing the genre of walking simulator has to offer, what remains of Edith Finch is absolutely worth checking out.